Well, good morning and welcome to our presentation on VR in nursing education. My name is Marinela Castano and I'm the nursing director at LSE North Harris. Presenting with me today is Brandy Falconer, who is a nursing faculty. We both have extensive experience with nursing simulation and share a passion for using advanced technologies in nursing education. We're excited to discuss VR in nursing. First, we'll review some major historical advances in technology-based learning, define VR, review the theoretical support, explain how we're implementing VR, and discuss areas for future research. So feel free to stop us at any point with questions. We'll get started. So in nursing education, computer-enhanced learning has continued to evolve over the last 20 years. Around 2006, we took our first dive into this when we started using high-fidelity mannequins capable of emitting voice sounds, making breathing movements, and other assessment findings. I mean, that was at least 17 years ago in my experience in nursing education. Then around 2011, we began using CD-based learning in which the student clicked on items in the hospital environment to provide nursing care. Later, we added haptics technology. So with this, the user's manipulation of a tactile object provides feedback to the computer. So using this to learn a physical skill is quite fitting. We had an IV haptics device, so students had the ability to practice starting an IV with computer-generated feedback. In light of worldwide events in 2020, we trialed several different types of digital clinical experiences: shadow health, simulation learning system, vSim, where students interacted with a computer-generated patient, and 100% of the interactions were within the computer environment. Of course, now there's a gamut wider than ever before of technologies and options. This is why it's important to make distinctions about specific technology we're using. Upon reviewing the research for VR, we encountered the term immersion virtual reality, which more fully describes the experience. VR involves wearing a headset to create a complete, non-existent environment, whereas augmented reality uses a phone or tablet to provide an overlay onto a physically existing environment. Many theories support the utilization of VR in nursing education. Kolb's experiential learning, where Kolb theorized there are several steps in the cycle of learning. Basically, this theory tells us that people learn through experience. This supports why we have clinical courses involving direct face-to-face patient care in facilities, and any type of method exposing the student to personal experiences from which the students can learn. There's Piaget, who theorized that learning is active discovery, placing the instructor in the role of learning facilitator. Learners must reflect and assimilate new knowledge to prior knowledge. Benner theorized that learning is a journey through stages: novice, advanced beginner, competent, proficient, and expert. She supports that experience, not time, is what guides the journey and allows progression from one stage to another. And then in Jeffrey's theory, this supports the use of simulated patients as a teaching method, focusing on the design, implementation, and evaluation of simulation in nursing education.
So we have a couple different strategies for implementing here. We got a significant grant from the state that allowed us to purchase our VR equipment. Implementation began this spring with students in their second semester. So they've had one semester, they've had kind of that fundamental overlay, and we're getting into that med-surg area. We use the Oculus console device, and it is paired with SimX virtual reality simulation for nursing education software. We have 5 sets of them, and we have sectioned off a dedicated area of our sim hospital for VR. There is literally nothing in it except a piece of tape on the floor that gives them an entry marker. That is the only thing that is in this space. And this software allows us to customize nurse and patient dialogue. We can change vital signs. We can change lab results. We can utilize approximately 570 different medical props. And this can be stethoscopes and IVs or IV poles, monitors, all of those different things that nurses need to do their job. We have 140 different patient avatars. So we're going to expose them to a variety of patients. And then we have about 97 realistic scenario environments. So this can be the ER, the OR, the ICU, med surg. We can also do primary care, community health. We can put you in an educational environment like an elementary school. All of these different places that nurses provide care. The initial goal for our nursing 2 students or students in their second semester was simply exposure. So we have to work through learning to just simply operate the console and then getting familiar with the environment itself. And when we do this, we were setting out to note what were challenges, what were successes, and how do we move past them. So we schedule a simulation day for our students and they come in and become familiar with the environment. We create what we would call a sandbox where they go in and they just start touching things and moving things and learning how to interact. They learn how to communicate with the patient, operate the tools, and they implement care without any specific objectives or goals in mind. We're just letting them get used to it. So far, our students are overwhelmingly impressed with the technology. They enjoy having the ability to look at multiple patients and multiple practice environments that they aren't likely to see in the clinical environment. And then we give them the ability to make judgment decisions without risking actual harm to patients. So this encourages them to be bold and to be confident and to learn how to navigate this environment without being terrified of hurting someone. The feedback has been that the environment feels realistic. It has a similar look and feel to the hospital rooms. They have the ability to feel successful when they go through this situation and they get to see a complete care scenario. Many students feel stress or brevity of actual patient care is removed and they're not scared to be wrong. They feel they do learn from the VR experience, working through the case scenarios corresponding to their lecture connects those learning dots and helps them see how this content we're teaching them in lecture actually applies to the patient. Some of the challenges that we've ran into using new technology is those students who don't regularly interact with video games struggle to learn the controls. They struggle to learn how to navigate the buttons. Another thing that we have noticed is the SimX software only allows forward progression. So this can hinder real-time learning because I don't have the ability to go back and connect that learning dot during the scenario. I have to connect it afterwards. It can be disorientating for some students because we put on a complete headset that covers their entire visual fields. So they can't necessarily see the floor or the walls. And so this can cause some disorientation for them. We've also noticed that students who wear glasses find the goggle design a little bit difficult and uncomfortable to wear for long periods. So we try to limit these scenarios to 20 minutes or so. The time required to set up the environment and then sync students into the VR scenario has also been a barrier considering the volume of nursing students that we have. It's taking us a little bit longer than we anticipated to get through setting up this scenario. Let's talk about what's next. So we're going to think about progressive integration. Instead of just kind of throwing all of it at them at one time, we're going to stair step them into this. Using this involves certain levels of skills and understanding. So we're going to unfold it in stages. Stage 1, as you can imagine, is going to be that first semester. We're going to introduce them, we're going to expose them to the environment, and we're just going to focus on facilitating an understanding of operating the environment. There won't be learning objectives or goals. They're just going to go in and play around and see what it's like. Stage 2 is going to happen in the second semester, and they're going to be introduced to a simple scenario that corresponds with their current lecture content with specific learning objectives. It's not going to be complicated, and it is going to be designed to spark their clinical judgment and make learning connections between that lecture material and that clinical material. That third semester, we're going to introduce a difficult or low exposure scenario. Low exposure meaning they're unlikely to get to see it in clinical or to be allowed to participate in clinical just because of the acuity of the situation. And we're going to have very specific learning objectives, and we're going to allow them to care for patients start to finish. The fourth semester, that final semester, these guys are getting ready to graduate. So we're going to introduce them to a scenario that challenges their comprehensive knowledge. And it's going to be something that challenges their knowledge from the entire program, from N1 through N4. We're going to have very specific learning objectives, and we're going to design this to care for a patient from start to finish. And we're going to consider all aspects of care, not a single content focus. We did a little pilot study with a couple of students over the spring semester, and we did it with N4 students who are preparing for graduation. This was their first exposure to VR. We selected a child asthma and a postpartum care scenario. Both are considered low exposure for clinical environments. We established student perception beyond the limited exposure that we have completed to date and utilized a patient scenario with specific learning objectives. Questions were scored on a Likert scale, focusing on the student experience and then the student perspective of said experience. Preliminary findings indicated that students enjoy a safe care environment and exposure to uncommon clinical experiences. They liked seeing things that they've never seen before, even though they've made it through 2 years of nursing school. They like the increased activity of the VR simulation avatar. It feels more interactive to them than a traditional simulation mannequin. They did not like the amount of time spent learning to navigate the environment itself. That took up quite a bit more time than we anticipated. We did have some feedback that the enclosed goggle setup caused nausea and dizziness after a prolonged period of time. And they did feel that the VR technology could be integrated into lectures to demonstrate things in a real-time process of learning. Overall, the students enjoyed it and are looking forward to more experience and the improvements in this technology. There is just a quick page of references that you can look through on some of this research. And then we'll take some questions.
There's no questions in our queue just yet, but one just popped up as soon as I said that, of course. It says, based on the price of the system, do you think that is worth the financial investment? Based on the time, is it worth the time?
I would say it will be. We are going to land in this environment at some point in time, and those who are going to be early adopters are going to have more input on that functionality and those improvements. So is it perfect right now? No. Is it worth the investment of my time and being crucial to how we improve it and going forward? I think it is.
I see a couple questions typed in the regular chat, so I'll go ahead and relay those as well. This one says, do students have time to become familiar with the equipment prior to completing the virtual reality sim lab?
Yes, so we're going to take that first semester and just expose them without objectives or goals. And then for our research, we did a formal orientation with them before they were put into the environment. So we give them the opportunity to go in and just learn how to use the technology before we put them into any scenarios.
And, for other disciplines, I think, we keep talking about that first semester being an orientation semester. That's only because we have over 100 students. So to get all 100 students through takes us a semester. With a smaller class size, it's definitely more manageable in terms of logistics to be able to have an orientation session and then skip through what you need them to learn in subsequent sessions within one semester.
Correct.
Yeah, a couple more questions just popped in. This one says, MetaQuest 3 is a mixed reality headset, which helps the disorientation issue as students can still see their actual environment. Are you planning on looking into this?
There are some really interesting tools that have since developed since we started down this journey. They actually have entire VR rooms now where the walls are the screens and the ceilings are holograms that will project things down. And they also have that mixed reality that you're talking about, where you can wear goggles that allow you to see your environment. And we can lay scenarios over our actual mannequins so students can get tactile feedback and touching and doing rather than simply holding a controller. So we are open to any and all mixes and or possibilities of these very cool things that are happening.
I have a question in the chat. Can you go back to the last slide, please?
Sure. Was it this one or this one?
Let me check. The references.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, while we're still on the slide, a couple more questions popped in. Did you receive a grant to purchase the program?
Yes, so we're very fortunate in nursing that we have state funding in terms of grants. And so this was actually acquired by Nursing Innovation Grant Program. So really looking at advancing technologies in nursing education.
Again, this next question says, do you think the technology will outpace your use quickly?
Yes, I do. I don't know about Brandy, but for sure, because we're being pioneers, like she said, we're having a lot of advances already. It is exciting to be a pioneer on the cutting edge, but that just means that the technology will quickly outpace what we're doing. But I still feel like as educators, we'll be still on the front edge of the learning curve ourselves to be able to adapt to those new advances.
And with technology, it all outpaces delivery. So when you buy a computer from Best Buy, it's already been updated before you take it out of the box. So we're gonna get outpaced in some of this stuff, and it'll end up being the same thing as it is with all technology. We'll keep it for a little while until we have the ability to update to the newest thing, and we're gonna skip a couple pieces of that technology in between. We're gonna get outpaced.
Okay, the next question asks, are there scenarios built into the equipment or do you have to build them?
The scenarios are provided by the CIMEX software, and they have just an absolute library of scenarios. Some are geared towards emergency medicine, some are geared towards physicians, some are geared towards respiratory therapists, some are geared towards nursing, and you go in as a faculty and select which scenarios you want to run that correspond with your lecture content and the level of knowledge that your student has. They provide the entire library and you go select what you want.
Okay, the next question asks, other than nursing, have you seen any other departments use it? And if so, how?
I have seen, so my husband spent 21 years in the military, and we use this technology to train them to drive. We use this technology to train them to provide first aid. Pilots use it to learn to fly. There are a lot of other areas. Surgical residencies use it to learn to put in stitches and learn to operate robot machines. So it goes well beyond just nursing. I don't know about Lone Star specifically, but the technology itself goes well beyond nursing.
And the next question I've got is there a way the students can practice with the headsets, maybe a different kind in an open lab environment?
We do have open lab environments. We have a wonderful lab coordinator who will set this stuff up for them and let them come in and practice it anytime that they want.
So the beauty of this is with that headset, they could actually be anywhere and joining in and participating in the scenario. We're not that advanced that we're going to say, hey, hop on at home and go ahead and join in. But that technology does allow for that.
Yeah, that ties into the next question, which is there any way to use this technology in the online environment?
Mhm. You absolutely can use it in the online environment.
And then the next question asks, what sort of preparation do the students do before?
So before is just learning the controls and going through those things. We typically don't give them the scenarios prior to, but we did discover during this little pilot study that not giving them the scenario and any background information on this patient does mean that they spend a significant amount of time reading charts and reading kind of background information and report information. So going forward, we are looking at providing them scenarios ahead of time. Now, if that's a couple days, a week, we haven't worked that part of it out yet, but we are considering giving them that information ahead of time so that they can be a little bit more prepared and cut down on that intro to the environment time.
And I do see a question here in the regular chat that you can answer. It says, were you required to submit a proposal to establish the initial simulation in the app? Can you share the process? I see that this software would be helpful for trade management careers.
To establish the initial simulation in the app. I'm not sure I understand. Our initial proposal for grant funding did have to lay out exactly, obviously quotes, and how much we were going to use, how much equipment and software we needed, which particular software, but and timelines. But I'm looking at the question here, to submit a proposal to establish the initial simulation in the app. Like Brandy said, this particular software that we use did partner with HESI Elsevier. So for nursing, that is important because they are a reputable publisher and known in nursing. So that was important that they had established those scenarios already for us to pick up and run with, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel in this environment ourselves.
We didn't solicit them to build the scenarios. They existed and we used them. I think that might be where we're trying to go.
Okay, one more question just popped in. It says, I think INA CSL supports providing students with patient situations and backgrounds in advance.
It does indeed. And Axel does do that as part of the simulation pre-brief, debrief situation that we set it up. This initial pilot was more focused on getting experience of students and trying to understand what our challenges and implementation hurdles were going to be, and not necessarily making it through the case scenario. So we did not go through that whole process. We put our N4 students or our 4th semester students into a case scenario because they are advanced enough to handle the scenario itself without necessarily needing a whole lot of background information on it. We were more focused on implementation and hurdles and identifying those challenges and those things that worked really well.
So for example, for any nursing educators listening, just stepping into it ourselves as we practiced and familiarized ourselves with the technology. I'll give you an example. So even just drawing up medication in a syringe, because you don't have that syringe in your hand, there's a different way to manipulate your controls to be able to draw that up. So I might physically know how to do that skill, but in a VR environment, that's done very differently. So I might look very incompetent trying to do that in that environment if I'm not familiar with the controls. So those are the things we wanted to learn. What are going to be those challenges that they encountered as they navigate that environment?
Yeah, this question just popped up here. It says, in a perfect world, describe your ultimate goals with the VR environment.
Oh, in a perfect world. Ooh, okay. So if we're talking, there are no limits to what my checks will clear. I want the entire VR room, the holograms, I want the walls, I want the mannequins, I want the goggle overlays, and I want to put it all together at the same time. In a perfect world, that's what I want.
There's no more questions queued up. We do have just over 15 minutes. Looks like you see about 17 minutes left. So if anyone has something come to mind, feel free to type it in that QA box. Oh, there's something. It says, how do you evaluate the students?
So for this one, we didn't do any formal evaluation. For those going forward, we're going to have a list of objectives with which they will have ahead of time. And it's going to be they either did or did not complete that objective. I imagine that as we get more into this and we kind of work through this, that will evolve into a more specific Anaxle-based like checklist environment. But we have to kind of work through that implementation phase in order to get it to that standard.
And a new one just popped in that says, how do you measure the student experience?
We did it through qualitative, and we asked them to provide us some feedback, and then we analyzed that feedback and pulled out some themes that applied to the majority of the students.
So hopefully we're looking forward to publishing that to share these findings. So maybe we'll work on that soon.
I think a follow-up question to that just popped up. It says like a survey. I'm guessing he's asking if you supplied that to the students.
Mhm.
It's a survey. We used a Likert scale, and we asked them to kind of rank different things that occurred during their experience. And then we gave them some open-ended questions to provide us just some feedback in their own words that we put into themes and pulled information out of.
So for example, one of the items I remember from feedback that was most outstanding in my mind was going to, do you remember, Brandy, going to a website or something to help minimize tips on minimizing that nausea while you're in the headset. So those are things that we could present ahead of time to them to prepare them for the experience.
Here's one last question here. It asks, do you think it is best to always partner with the nursing publishers?
Not necessarily. I'm comfortable having done simulation enough. And that was one of our questions actually for the software company was if we are allowed to ad lib. So kind of what Brandy mentioned before, where she's not able to pause it, rewind, go back. Once you're stuck in their app with the way it's designed to be delivered, it really marries you to that. But I would be even more comfortable in an environment where I could manipulate the controls and be able not be stuck to a timeline, a preset timeline, where it's going to unfold just a certain way, but adapt more to the way that they are reacting within that scenario.
And I think as we go through this and this technology advances, these folks that are the software designers and engineers, they're not nurses. And I can't design the software or it wouldn't be usable in any way, shape, or form. So we're going to have to just continue to work together to push this software forward to where it gets to allow us that pause, that rewind, that ad lib, because sometimes in nursing, things don't go as you plan. And so sometimes you have to zig when you originally thought you were going to zag, but that technology just isn't there yet. And so partnering with these folks who are putting out these software platforms is currently the only option we have. Unless you are a software designer, in which case, email me.
We have a couple more questions just popped in. This one asks, did you feel that the student learning experience of the concept has been better or outstanding or something else?
I think their ability to learn with this technology, because it's not focused on can you physically put in an IV, it's not focused on these physical skills. putting an IV in this world just involves hitting a button and the IV magically goes into the patient. So by removing that focus on that physical skills, we have forced them to critically think. And that in the nursing world is exponentially more valuable than any physical skill. So putting them in this environment that puts them in the thinking position rather than in the doing position has been very helpful to their ability to work through it because there are no consequences. Our traditional format of putting them into the doing position is putting them into the hospital taking care of patients. And that comes with the brevity of having somebody's life in your hands. So we remove that and we allow them to flourish in their thinking by using this technology.
And I think that's really the exciting part as an educator and why I was so really stricken that we had to move forward with this technology, because I was taken back 20 years when we had our first high fidelity mannequin. What I saw in looking at the demo was that it would allow me to step into the student's mind and see how they're thinking as they're navigating this. Because like Brandy said, to her point, it's not about can they physically handle, move, do this. It's about, did they even open the IV drawer? Did they even reach over to check the settings and look? So I can see their thinking as it unfolds, which is, that's so important, vitally important, fundamental.
Okay, and the last question I can see here is, I have read about the virtual scenarios that are done online at home by students, and the computer evaluates the students. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, so we use that currently. We have a product called vSim, and we assign them vSims that are lecture content specific, where they go through and they're able to click buttons and create a patient scenario. And those scenarios are developed with specific objectives in mind. And we alter the intensity of that based on what level of learning they're at. And at the end of it, it does give them a feedback, and it highlights critical things that are missed, and those are like those red objects. And then it will highlight some things that are important but not critical, and that puts them in yellow. And it kind of gives them a evaluation at the end that says, hey, I know you were thinking this, but we needed you to think over here. And then they can rerun that scenario and you can see that thought process change. It does equate to percentages. We do not grade them on it. Simulation should not be something that is graded, so it becomes a participation requirement, not necessarily a percentage grade. The idea is that it's designed to allow them to operate freely and kind of work through their thought processes and then see where they did really great and where they can improve on and what their weak areas are, and then go back and try again. So we currently use that.
Limitation, biggest limitation of that is that, again, it is in a stuck set pathway. So I had a student tell me one time, oh, I killed Doris 5 times before I finally made it through.
Yes.
So, it's not a computer that is in any kind of intellectual form understanding that student's actions, that, if you did 2 instead of 3 first, that's okay. You're not killing anyone. Those steps can be reversed. Whereas in this type of environment with a facilitator live right there, that can easily be overcome.
Another question just popped up. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's very difficult to get students out of that linear thought process, because our entire K through 12 education is a linear process. We increase the difficulty of content, but nursing doesn't work in a linear fashion. I can just give you a foundation of a disease process, but you have to be able to take that foundation and apply it to any one of the 8 billion people that exist on this planet. And that's what makes nursing hard. And so that is why the thought process or the critical thinking aspect is so much more important than the physical aspect. And if you are a computer and you are not necessarily a nurse computer, that can be a really hard thing because it's not a linear process. Sometimes step 6 can be completed before step 3. And then sometimes it should be completed before step 3. So it's taking kind of that linear environment and putting nurses in there and asking them to think through it. And that's why we don't assign percentages or grades, and we use it as a learning tool.
Okay, this question asks, so what is the faculty to student ratio needed to run the scenarios and set up the room?
We have found, so we've put anywhere from 2 to 4. We attempted 5 once. We have discovered that about 3 students in that VR environment is probably the max to get the effective use out of it. And you can run that with 1 faculty member. It's not necessarily that you're required to have X amount of faculty for X amount of students. It's the way the environment is designed. And then we have to think about their ability to manipulate the things all at the same time. So 3 to 1 is kind of that magic number that we found.
Okay, the next question asks, do you see this technology used in hospitals especially for the GN?
Absolutely, this
Hospitals
technology.
are already using this. They already are. So they're ahead of us in this.
And they use it for annual training even for seasoned nurses. We all know that if we don't use it, we lose it. And so hospitals were ahead of education on adopting this and implementing it to train their nurses.
This question just came through. Are you using this in place of clinical hours?
So we are counting their time, anytime in simulation lab as clinical time.
And you can safely replace up to 50% of all clinical hours. And if you want some more information on that, there's a landmark NCSBN study that was done on simulation and clinical hour replacement without impacting learning outcomes. If you need that, email me. I'm happy to provide it.
We're officially at the 5-minute warning here, so we have 5 minutes left in this webinar. So if you have a last-minute question here, and one just came up as soon as I said that. Would it be feasible to use a common sim lab for several uses, hospital or more schools, to help with the cost?
Absolutely. We have multiple areas. We're very fortunate that our sim hospital, our sim lab area is large. So we have an at-home room, so you can do community health stuff there. You can do outreach programs in that room where it looks like an apartment. We have open bays that could mimic med surge. We have an individual area where our kind of OB stuff sits. We have our VR room. So you could absolutely partner to offset some of the expenses that come along with this with multiple schools, and you can do multiple things at a time. When I do simulation on any given Wednesday, we are running 3 different operations at the same time.
Okay, this question asks, does EMT use this as well?
Yes, so they have an entire section specifically designed for EMTs. And then if you were looking at multidisciplinary simulations, you can run, EMTs are going to bring you this patient, and then this patient's going to go through the ER, and then the ER is going to send them up to the med surge floor, and then med surge is going to discharge, and a community health nurse or a home health nurse is going to come take care of them. You can run the entire gamut, start to finish, of taking care of these patients.
Yeah, I'll give everyone one last chance to type in a question here, and we'll wrap up. Larry asked in the regular chat, if we are in Houston, can we come take a tour?
Absolutely, you can. Mari, if you'll flip to that last page, it's got our emails on it. You can reach out, email me. I'd be happy to tour you around and let you hop in this environment and play around.
I would love to have an open house, so where we would, this was really what I envisioned, having an open house to where we are inviting community partners to visit, current students, future students, high schools, everyone to be able to share what we're doing.